Joining me now is David Sinclair, who's stepping into the very big shoes being vacated by Sally Greengross as Chief Executive. Sally set a very high bar for you, David.
Oh, absolutely. And it's an extraordinary privilege to have worked with Sally over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, and I feel really, really lucky to have the opportunity to sort of push forward what she's been trying to do. And Sally's vision for ILC was always that we were not an older people's organisation, that we were an organisation that was focused on understanding society in the context of demographic change, and I think we've sort of achieved that, but there's so much more to do.
Thinking ahead, what are the challenges? It strikes me that there's such a crowded policy agenda at the moment that finding a niche for longevity could be quite difficult.
I think the biggest challenge is if, frankly, not enough people are interested in the impact of ageing on society. It's an extraordinarily challenging, as you say, environment to get the messages out there, and yet they are at the heart of how we all, as younger and older people, live well. It's really clear, for example, that younger people today are struggling to get houses. It's clear that from our research that younger people today are likely to end up poorer than their parents. It's clear that we're not providing the right sort of education, both at a young age and then in middle age, lifelong learning, for people to be able to live longer lives. So we've got a real challenge with how we engage people with the fact that they are likely to live much longer. In terms of housing, actually we've got this massive shortage of appropriate housing for younger people. We've got a shortage of appropriate housing for older people. We know people aren't saving enough. We know social care for today and for tomorrow is in a complete mess. These are at the heart of how we live our lives, and it's extraordinarily important that ILC really grabs these and creates this sense of urgency about the need for change.
You have a forthcoming event, I think, with the working title, Are We Still Unprepared for Ageing? And I'm taking from what you're saying that the answer is, from your point, is yes.
Absolutely. I think 4 or 5 years ago, Lord Filkins, House of Lords Committee, talked about being unprepared for ageing. A couple of years later, he decided we were woefully unprepared for ageing. We're still pretty unprepared for ageing, and part of it's a behavioural issue that we all want to deny we're like our dads, that our eyesight won't go and our hearing won't go. And actually, part of the problem is because as individuals we deny ageing. It's really hard to convince society for the need to change, and this is particularly the case where you have a political class that's only elected for 4 or 5 years, where actually some of the things we might need to do are going to be extraordinarily unpopular for older people, frankly, as well as younger people.
How given you're approaching this, on the basis of intergenerational work, the life course, how do you get government departments and others outside government who don't immediately recognise ageing as an issue for them because they don't deal with older people? How do you get them to engage?
I think governments, policymakers, and indeed industry talk the talk on intergeneration. They say, we want people, younger and older to work together. But actually, I don't think they really get it. I think we have a massive problem with government, with policy at the moment. The short-termism, both in terms of UK political process, but also globally, is an astonishing barrier to engaging. So clearly a big part of the new job is working out how we do this. Now, one of the real challenges that we've had historically is that, work on old age has sort of been stuck in DWP, and then work on health is stuck somewhere else, and then work on transport is stuck somewhere else, and international development is stuck somewhere else. And frankly, in the context of ageing, there has been very, very limited cross-governmental focus. I think what government should do, and I think what's extraordinarily important, is that the big challenges we've got for the future, ageing, demographic change, climate change, and indeed technology, need to come together, and we need actually governments to start to properly plan for the long term. In parts of Scandinavia, they have a Minister for the Future, I think, which incorporates some of these issues. And I think what we need to make sure is that actually we're not pitching young against old, we're not pitching cancer against dementia, but we're actually starting to say, look, more and more of us are living longer. We're living longer, actually not necessarily healthier. That government has a target to achieve 5 extra healthy years frankly, that it is completely unachievable at the moment. So we absolutely need governments to be actually put to task on this, and I think we failed to do that, frankly, over the last decade or so.
And in addressing these challenges, how will you draw on the strengths of the global network of ILC?
We're really lucky here at ILC-UK in that we've got 15 other ILCs across the world who actually we work really, really closely with, a network of very strong academics who and policy influencers who really they know policymakers, they know how to engage, they know the issues, and they're astonishingly well respected. We have people in China, one of the world's most eminent doctors. We have people in Australia, one of the world's most eminent researchers. We've got some astonishingly capable people within the network, and we have to use those and use those well. Now, actually, one way that we're building a network across Europe, an ILC Europe network. It's really important that at European level, we pull us all together to actually try to identify and work together in terms of some of the solutions to some of these big challenges. But actually then at a global level, I think the real potential is that whilst I alluded to policymakers sort of, frankly, having relatively little interest and being relatively slow at responding to this, what's really clear is that I think they do get the nature of the problem. And we, for example, back in the last time we could do events before lockdown, and did an event alongside the G20 health ministers, and we had health ministers from Japan, we had the US health minister, we had the Singaporean, we had representatives of the Spanish government, we had the Canadian government. Actually, what we have across the world is this astonishing global network who can help us get in front of people. Over the last couple of years, we've done events virtually, but actually we'd have never got them into a room with the New Zealand health minister, with the South African minister. I think the name international in itself opens some doors, which is really useful for influence. And to give an example, after we did the event it's not just events for events' sake. We're good at convening, but actually, when we did the event in 2019, we know that we did the event before the final documents were prepared, and that the wording was changed as a result of the event that we did, and that with a greater focus around preventative health.
And if there was such a thing as a league table of the 16 countries affiliated to ILC, where would the UK be? Are we at the top there, or are we at the bottom in danger of relegation?
I think it's a really, really good question, is where the UK sits in terms of the extent to which it's responded to longevity and ageing over the last sort of 20 or 30 years. And I think if you look at the UK, you look at France, you look at North America, we've been aging over about 300 years, which means that policymakers have never had this sense of urgency. They've always been able to put it off until tomorrow. If you look today at places like South Korea, if you look at even places like China, look at places like India, where you're seeing rapid aging over a much shorter period, where policymakers are likely to have to respond quicker because there will be greater public pressure, I think you'll see a very different pattern. And I think actually we're going to be looking to places like Singapore, places like Hong Kong, places like South Korea to sort of look at how they are adapting to this rapid aging. I think the UK, there are certain things the UK is pretty good at in terms of, I think certainly in terms of evidence. We've got some world-leading sort of academics, and ILC works across the board with academics within the UK and beyond. But I think where we really struggle is actually in the getting people to grasp that actually the impact of aging, the impact of demographic change isn't just about older people. It's actually about, what's the impact of having more older people on children? What's the impact of having more older people on health resources for younger people? What's the impact of housing supply when you have a group of more and more older people and essentially living longer? What's the impact on work, where actually we're getting to a place, and this is common across the whole world now, where we basically haven't got enough workers. You go to places like, including some of those countries I just mentioned, Hong Kong and Singapore, where there is a real shortage of healthcare workers. We've got major challenges in the context of demographic change, of filling our jobs, keeping our economy going. Now, this isn't the whole silver tsunami narrative. It's actually about, and we use the language of the longevity dividend, it's about actually how do we make the most of the fact that we're living longer to create an economic return. So for me, what that means is we need to emphasize the fact that investing in health results in people working longer, volunteering more, caring more, and spending more. And coming back to your early question, I think that's exactly how you engage policymakers. You start to say, look, actually, this is not, spending on health and spending on care is not dead money. It's not. It's actually a really important part of the economy. So part of certainly my priority, and I think our priority, is actually perhaps spending a little bit less time talking to health ministers and a bit more time to finance ministers.
David Sinclair, thank you very much.